Hello and welcome to the Recruit Rockstars podcast, where we focus on the people part of your business. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I interview a world-class expert on talent and recruiting so that you can build your company filled with rock stars. And I have really been looking forward to this interview today because our guest has seen these issues from so many different purviews. Before I tell you and welcome Shannon to the show, let me tell you a little about Shannon's background. Shannon Anderson began her career at Microsoft, where she survived. For 9 years, she didn't just survive. She built the recruiting and talent function that scaled this thing from 8,000 people to 4 or 5 times that size, 40,000 people. She had a team of up to 50 people under her, just recruiting, just interviewing. Then she joined one of the top VC firms around, Ignition Partners, as their founding talent partner. If that wasn't enough, she somewhere had the time to get involved with a search firm and do a ton of senior level search work, something like 200 executive searches. Now she finds herself back on the VC side at Madrona Venture Group. Now Madrona, I'm guessing you're familiar, is based in Seattle. She's been there 2 years, and they've got something like 80 portfolio companies in and around the tech space. So with all that said, I couldn't be more excited to welcome Shannon to the show. How are you, Shannon?
I'm great, Jeff. Thank you so much. And that introduction, I'm going to record it because it's been any introduction I've made for myself. So thank you.
I love it. Well, it's true. There's nothing I say that's not true, and it gives you a really unique perspective. So why don't we start at the top? How did you get into this stuff? Where along the line did you learn that talent and recruiting and culture was your thing? Because not every kid grows up saying, I want to be a headhunter when I grow up, or I want to work in recruiting.
One day I was getting on the elevator at a company where I was selling advertising for a newspaper. And I saw this woman, prior to getting into the elevator, drive up in a red Porsche. And I thought, interesting. I'm really curious what she does. She looked about my age. So I made small talk with her, and I found out what she did. And she worked for an executive recruiting firm. And so the next day I went up there and I put in my resume. And when I sat down for an interview with the CEO, he asked me why I wanted to work at his firm. And I said, I really want to help people. And he promptly stood up, stuck out his hand to thank me for coming in and walk me out the door. And we're talking 3 minutes into the interview.
Wow. You should have said the Porsche.
Well, I did. So I had on this crazy red suit, and I felt very bold, and I wouldn't stand up. I wouldn't take his hand. And I said, please sit back down. I'm going to tell you why I'm really here. And he says, okay. And I said, I'm here because I want to make a lot of money.
Wow.
It's like, let's get started. So an hour and a half later, I got the job. Well, it turns out that I was pretty good at it, and I was pretty good at making money. But what I didn't really like was the orientation toward the sales aspect of recruiting.
Yeah.
What I really loved was the matchmaking.
Yep.
And my specialty was always what I call a hole-in-one, where I was not into calling 500 people and getting 30 candidates and maybe one of them sticking. I was really into spending a lot of time on the front end, speccing out the role, understanding the problem that needed to be solved, and then finding people that looked like they were interested in solving those problems or had proven themselves able to do that. And for me, that was a big differentiator for me as a recruiter, but also for me as being very satisfied emotionally with my work. So that's the real answer. I really just wanted to make a lot of money. Turned out I got to do a little bit of both.
And you found your passion along the way, which I give you a ton of credit for. Obviously, you've excelled at it and been really recognized for this. So kudos to you. And I hope you got the Porsche. Did you get the Porsche?
I didn't. I got a Mercedes instead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Close enough.
I got a few of those, yeah.
Good.
Now I don't have a car at all because I live in downtown Seattle and I walk everywhere. And I have no encumbrance whatsoever. So
yeah. Now, for people that don't know, tech is booming in Seattle. Like never before, obviously with Amazon and Microsoft. But beyond that, how do you put color on what's happening in tech in Seattle right now?
30 years ago when I came to Seattle was a one-horse town. We have, in terms of tech, and that's my business, we have Microsoft. And then we had a couple of sprinklings, like a little database company here and a big old giant Boeing over there.
Yeah.
And every candidate that I had to recruit to come to Microsoft was going to be a relocation, and very oftentimes with a trailing spouse and a trailing family. When there's no ecosystem in a city that is just at the infancy, it is very difficult to recruit people. And so selling the promise of what Microsoft was doing, putting I think it was a computer on every desk in every home. That was our thing at the time.
Yeah.
That was pretty compelling, but we were offering under market salaries and sort of this promise that stock options might be worth something. And it was very, very, very different than it is today. Fast forward to 2019, almost 2020, I believe the number is 25% of all of the startups in Seattle that have reached some sort of level of success were founded by Microsoft expats or Microsoft employees. That is a pretty amazing number. And that number is changing because we're also getting a lot of Amazon DNA into the startup cycle. And so it's very different. Now, Seattle, just as an example, not only hundreds of startup companies, but many companies that have gone from zero day one to billions. And we're talking Amazon. So Amazon is one of those startups that came after Microsoft. It was like they were stealing our people. And the main reason that Jeff Bezos founded Amazon in Seattle, number one reason, was because he wanted to poach that Microsoft talent.
And he knew he could get it.
Yeah, he knew that there were folks that were right. And so that's just continued. Today there are over 130 engineering outposts or HQ number 2. 130 larger companies have established those outposts here. Google being
Incredible.
the first, and I helped build that first Google office actually when I was doing executive recruiting, but now Facebook and every tech company.
Any company that needs tech talent, even non-tech companies, has built an outpost in Seattle. And
so for example, Capital One is an example of a non-tech company. And healthcare companies, Providence is a healthcare company that's building tech. So all kinds of interesting things going on.
And you've been an integral part of it.
I've been lucky to be a part of it. There's a lot of amazing people whose shoulders I stand on, though, I tell you.
I love your modesty. And so I'm curious, you work with so many founders of so many companies, and obviously we're not going to name names, but when you think about lessons learned, things you've observed from these founders along the way, from a talent perspective, just a people perspective, forget about the product or funding, whatever else, what seems to separate those that make it versus those that don't? So what do they do early in the life of the business from a people perspective that makes a big impact?
There's a couple of really important things. I think I'll touch on each one of these, but first one is defining the culture and operationalizing the culture, not just putting the words on the website. Talk about that in a second. I think the second thing is having a high level of understanding of what a good employee looks like for their company, even if it's a less than 5 people. Really understand what great looks like for the company. And then getting the message out to the market that this is a problem, the problem that your company is solving is actually the way that you explain that to candidates is oriented to the kinds of problems they want to solve. I'm not saying that as clearly as I want, but you have to have complete and total alignment with what candidates want to do and what you're doing. So
just as you look for product market fit between your product and customers, you're looking for product market fit between your culture and prospective candidates.
That's perfect. I love the way you phrase that.
I just came up with that. It sounded good, didn't it?
That's what it is, right on the fly. That's perfect. That is like one of the top things that founders fail to do well.
When does that need to be done in terms of number of people or revenue or investment stage? In other words, what's the point of no return where if you haven't done that, you're kind of screwed?
Well, I think if you're not doing that from day one, then then at some point you're going to be in this catching up retrofitting. And eventually any company that starts experiencing some level of its success, if they haven't done that at day one, they're in this retrofitting mode. And it's much harder.
Yeah.
To build, if you always want to build your house on a very solid foundation with all of your pilings, pounded into the ground and everything's firm. And if you don't do that, things are going to start crumbling. Porches are going to kind of start tilting off the foundation. So it's day one. And when I'm talking about day one, I'm talking about, there's an example. I can share the name of the company. Amperity is one of our portfolio companies in Seattle, and they're a marketing tech company. The founders, before they even incorporated their business, decided what problem they were going to solve, or had any idea of just where this was going to go. They knew they wanted to work together and they wanted to build an enduring company. And so they sat down in one of the founders' basements for a day, and they each wrote down their personal values at work. And then they merged those ideas and created their cultural values and built their company on top of that. And they operationalized and incorporated, I should say, those cultural values into everything they do in a conscious way, not just an accident,
It's not just a bullshit list that hangs on the wall, right?
It's like, do you remember Enron? This is going back.
Of course.
Dating myself, but Enron had all these great words on their website, integrity.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, the people that were rewarded were actually the people that were not, acting with integrity. But then fast forward a little bit, they actually were rewarded by jail time, so, but words did not match the behavior. And when you're a founder and you say, we're high integrity, we're, we're like oriented toward results, customer first. But if everything you do and say and decisions that you make aren't 100% in line with those cultural values, it is going to erode your company. And when the going gets tough, those are the things that will, sticking to those values and holding each other accountable will get you through rough times. Netflix is a really good example of a company that lived with their values and still does, and has been a tectonic shift in their market. But their values haven't faltered, and some of their original people are still there, even though some of the original people were stuffing, DVDs in envelopes. And now they're like writing algorithms, probably. Maybe not the exact same people, but yeah, some of them.
Yeah, it really does get you through the tough times, which inevitably every early stage company has.
Yeah.
So you mentioned an interesting word. You said operationalizing. Can you give an example or two of what that looks like? So if I'm a CEO of a business and I take this time and I define our values and our DNA, now I need to operationalize it. I have it written down on a piece of paper. How do I operationalize it? What's an example?
First of all, other than defining the words like integrity, high integrity, cultural values, you have to really take it a click or two down and say, what are the signals for that? Like, what does integrity look like on a day-to-day basis when I'm interacting with my team? What are the noises, like that things that might look like integrity, but they're really just self-service? So it's really important, I think, to get those signals and noise defined so that people know what it looks like, so that when you're recruiting and interviewing people, you can evaluate them against those actual attributes and how they perform in the interview and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
So you have to click down and do that. But then operationalizing, it sounds really fancy, but here's two examples that I've seen. Microsoft, with Satya Nadella at the helm, has, and many people on his team and his leadership team have redefined their culture from a culture of competitiveness with each other and with everybody in the market, and kind of dog eat dog, and every man for themselves, every woman for themselves, to a culture of service. And the culture of service is customer service, serving their customer and working together to serve that customer. And while they're competing with each other and not against each other, okay? So what the leadership team there does, Amy Hood, who's the CFO, of Microsoft who rarely speaks in public. She came to speak to a group of our CFOs not long ago, and this topic came up. And she said, one of the ways that the leadership team at Microsoft is starting to operationalize their culture of, let's see, I forget what it's called. I don't know, on the top of my mind. It doesn't matter. There's three, like accountability, integrity.
Service, one of them.
Service,
Yeah.
customer. But those, it's accountability, respect, and intentional or integrity, I think. Anyway,
Yep.
Miss Amy for forgetting what they were off the top of my head. But they open every leadership meeting with a piece of paper with those values written on them and their version of signals and noise. And they talk about how are we going to make sure that these values, help guide us in our interactions with each other today. The decision.
Wow. It's almost like saying a prayer before a business meeting, like some people do in the South.
Yes.
It's kind of having a reminder right in front of you. It's right front and center.
Yeah, and it's very intentional, and it's about accountability. And from what I understood from Amy is they hold each other accountable for upholding those values in the meeting, in their communications with each other, how they follow up. So that's like a way. The other way you do it is, you build these things into your hiring and assessment process, and you teach everybody in the company how to interview, looking for those signals and noise, and then you integrate those values into every way that you evaluate a person. So if it's a performance review, those have to be part of the performance review, the self-review, the 360, whatever it's
Not
called.
only did you make the numbers this quarter, but how you made the numbers, how you interacted with others.
Yes.
So I have to imagine.
Some simple ways. Yeah, so some simple ways to do it.
I have to imagine that also means parting ways with people when it's become clear that either they were a bad hire in the first place. In other words, somehow they got through, which happens, right?
Yeah.
Or something else changed along the way.
Mm-hmm.
What advice do you have, tangible advice around how long to give it? If you're the leader or the manager, how long do you take to make that decision? And how do you part ways with someone who has otherwise done a great job, been a loyal soldier, been an integral part of the business, and now you're showing them that it's time to pursue other opportunities outside the company? How do you do that?
Well, I'm not an HR professional. I'm a talent professional. So I fake it a little bit on the HR side. So I don't know what all the legal ramifications are of this question, but I know that some of the very successful CEOs in our portfolio, and I know that skills can be learned. Values cannot be learned. And if you're in the business of teaching people how to be better people, then you should try to help people like change those things about them that are kind of hardwired. But if you're building a software company from scratch and you've got somebody on the bus that's a jerk, and one of your cultural values is no jerks,
right?
Or if you want to say that a little more eloquently, or integrity is one that's very easy to see.
Sure.
Respect, then you get off the bus. And I don't really make room for people like that. I don't give people a lot. I mean, you either are or you aren't behaving in a way that is in alignment with the cultural values. And yeah, you can give people feedback like, oh, I know you think you're being respectful by acting this way, but the way that shows up is this way. Can you please correct that? Absolutely. Like, oh, thank you for letting me know.
It's a very tough thing for early stage founders to do for the first time.
It is, especially if you have somebody who is like a 10x software engineer, right? Like, oh my God, I need this person.
Or a salesperson.
A salesperson, classic example. So what? I might be a jerk, but I'm getting the numbers. That person is toxic to the environment, and it's not worth it to keep them around. And for any longer than you absolutely must have them around, and that should be a very short period of time. And I just don't see people changing their stripes. And have a front row seat to a situation like this right now. where there's somebody on the team that was one of the first hires, in fact, maybe even a founder, hire that got founder shares.
Yeah.
This person is a prima donna. This person cannot accept taking, roles or doing dirty work.
Right.
And that is like not the kind of culture that the company has developed yet.
Well, that's the nature of an early stage company.
Yeah. Yes. So I just feel like that's, you can say this person's really performing well, but they're, the culture thing, it's like they're not performing well. They're not performing well if they're not being held accountable and performing against those cultural values just as well as the skills and the other things that they have to deliver. To me, there's, not one that's more important than the other. You have to. But if you have cultural values, alignment, and some skills that need to be developed or some maturity, you can work with that all day.
Yeah.
Okay. So
since you are, as you said, not an HR generalist, you're really exceptional on the talent front, the recruiting front. And in the couple minutes remaining, I want to shift gears to the advice that you give to your portfolio companies about how to hire the best talent when you're up against Amazon or Netflix or Google, companies that have what would seem like limitless money. They can promise the world. You're a 10-person company, a 100-person company. No one's heard of you before. You can't outpay them. How do you go about still getting the best people on your bus?
Jeff, it goes all the way back to that product market fit, that talent culture fit. And it's not, when I talk about culture in this context, I'm also talking about the motivators, the reasons that people want to come to work every day.
Beyond money.
Non-money. So you cannot compete on money. You can try to compete on a story about money, which is a slippery path.
Yeah.
But the person that's very happy and performing well as a 5-year engineer at Google is not the same person that's going to come to a scrappy startup, set up their own PC, and work in a cubicle under conditions of ambiguity, right? That's not the same person. It could become the same person, but the things that Google does to attract talent, they have, massive amount of interesting projects. You're surrounded by incredibly smart people. You have unlimited resources. You can work from any office in the world.
You have a brand name that every single person has heard of before.
And your mom isn't going to get mad at you, or your family isn't going to get ashamed of you if you go to work for Google. So, so the people that go to startups have conviction about what kind of problems they want to solve and under what conditions they want to solve them. And they know why. And they may not match exactly with, not everybody in a startup may not have the same why, but they have the same conviction that they want to be there and build something. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're building something that's going to change the world. Of course, they hope they do, or it's not going to have social impact. For an engineer, it might be building V1 of, a product. They've never had a chance to do that before, or they've done it before and they love doing that.
Yeah.
Or, solving a problem that they care about very, very much and doing anything they can to be involved in that. So I think the key is to understand the why of the company. Why do we exist? What problems do we solve? How are we going to solve those problems? And when you're talking about individual people that are going to join the team, tell them, okay, in the context of the problems we're solving, the customers we're serving, these are the problems you get to solve. And these are the milestones that we as a company have to reach, or that you have to reach, and spell it out in English and in metrics so that people know, wow, my first year or my first 60 days or my 30 days are going to look like this.
Yeah.
Next year's going to look like this. And, talk about the things that are not big company things, like, oh, we get free pop. Like, nobody cares about that.
Benefits and time off and beer bashes.
They don't care about that, but what they do care about is they do want to be affiliated with a really high quality group of people solving a really high quality problem. And if you can't sell anything else because the company's too early, you sell the problem, and you sell the people.
I've actually found that the bigger the challenge and the bigger the problem, the better the top performers really aspire to that. They don't want to be bored, because that's a big challenge with them today, is bored.
Yeah, and they want to know that there's somebody in the leadership role that has a vision that they believe in and they can get behind, or they be founders themselves. And maybe some of them do want to be founders and they want to learn about that, and that's another motivator. So I think, Google and Amazon do a great job of appealing to the motivators of their candidate pools, and really great startups. Like, we have a startup that's incubating here in our space. They are about 6 weeks old. They started out with 2 founders. They hired a third founder as a CTO, and they've already hired 6 or 7 engineers.
Yeah.
And they're competing with Amazon and Google, all these companies.
And they're not paying Amazon and Google wages. So clearly it can be done.
It can be done. And you know what? They're sitting out in our incubation space, and every time I go by there, they are sweaty and excited and cuddling, and they're on the whiteboard and they're working their butts off. But these people are all being paid much less than they could be making it at Amazon or whatever. And they're aligned with the problems that the company is solving and why, and the cultural values. And this company also, by the way, has done a great job of defining the cultural values before they even started recruiting. And because they were lucky to have me to lead them through a 60-minute conversation, helping them do that, kind of using Post-it notes and just, so they've been able to articulate that and align their candidate targets to that.
So if you're in the market for talent and you're up against Google or Facebook or Apple, don't try to sell benefits. Don't try to sell money. Don't even try to sell equity. Sell the challenge, sell the people that they're going to work with, and make sure that you articulate it pretty early, even in the first few people.
Yes. And then a fourth thing, or a third or fourth thing you can do is, if you're funded by Madrona as a startup, you'll have me and all kinds of other
So with that said, let's do the plug. How about that? How can people learn more about Madrona Venture Group, based in Seattle, phenomenal venture fund, or get in touch with you, Shannon?
Thank you. Well, you can go to madrona.com. And if you're a founder, you can read all about, actually we have a podcast called Founded and Funded, and you can find us on any of the major podcast distributors. And go to our website. We have an investment thesis memo that we wrote last year that tells you everything about the 4 pillars of our investment memo and the technologies that we're investing in. And we have a career page which has about close to usually about 1,000 open positions at any one time.
Wow.
Across about 75 positions, some 75 companies, because not all of them have websites yet. And so that's one way to learn. And you can also reach out to me on LinkedIn and just follow us. So we'd appreciate that.
Shannon, we appreciate you sharing your insights about how to do it, how not to do it. And congratulations on everything that you've done in building the Seattle tech community.
Thanks, Jeff, and congratulations to you too. You're doing a great job on these podcasts, and I cannot keep up with you.
Don't even try. Thanks, Shannon.
All right, thanks, Jeff.